Before I answer that question, I want to remind everyone to download, rate, and subscribe to the 415ers podcast because you get conversations like this 3 days a week on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday on the Odyssey Sports Podcast Network with 95.7 The Game. I'm on Twitter at eGiddings10. Marc is on Twitter at Marc Grandy. Marc with a C, Grandy with an I. Okay. I think what is in Kyle Shanahan's best interest, regardless of who his quarterback is, and maybe this is where we differ, is to win football games.
Well, that's a given.
Who is right now the best person situated to do that? That's Jimmy Garoppolo. Yeah, but now next year that might change. But I believe Kyle Shanahan thinks that he can win like 9-10 games with Jimmy as his quarterback in the regular season without much of an effort. And I think that moving forward, the goal is to make sure that you can win not only 9 to 10 games, but then win 3 to 4 more come playoff time. That's the next evolution. That's the next thing that everyone wants to see from Shanahan. I think he's proved that he can win with a viable quarterback in the regular season. The question is, can he, hopefully what Trey Lance can be, get you to a Super Bowl? That's what people are going to base his tenure in San Francisco off of. So whatever gets him closer to that, to me, if they won the Super Bowl this year, Marc, you really think people would care about him giving up 3 picks for Trey Lance?
I guess that brings us to, kind of the next topic in general is did the 49ers, was trading up in the 2021 NFL draft the wrong move to select a quarterback, whoever it was? I mean, to your question, if they win a Super Bowl, is anyone going to care about Trey Lance and whether or not he's the starter? I would argue, yes, obviously, the fan base and everyone in the 49ers would be happy that the team won a Super Bowl, would be happy that, Jimmy Garoppolo played well enough to win. But at the same time, you need to take everything into account here. The fact that Kyle Shanahan openly admitted, verbally and just by his actions, that Jimmy Garoppolo is not good enough to win, to be our starting quarterback moving forward. And that he invested a big chunk of the team's future in Trey Lance. And you deciding, that he suddenly doesn't give you the best chance to win is, admitting that he was wrong about everything about Jimmy Garoppolo and Trey Lance? Like, I know you just won a Super Bowl and you're feeling good about yourself and you're feeling good about the team, but I would be hesitant to make a move like that, to openly admit to my boss and my superiors and everyone who was looking at me to make all these important football decisions that I made the wrong decision, the wrong one, to even trade up for a new quarterback, and then 2, in selecting potentially the wrong guy. I mean, I do not want to be in that position if I'm Kyle Shanahan. Oddly enough, winning a Super Bowl, while of course you want it, it's going to put him into an extremely awkward predicament going into next season. Because what could you possibly do? You start Jimmy Garoppolo, and everyone is going to be mad at you for trading up for a new quarterback and drafting Trey Lance. You start Trey Lance, everyone is going to yell at you for benching a Super Bowl winning quarterback or moving on from a Super Bowl winning quarterback. Obviously, the Niners want to win a Super Bowl, but if they win this Super Bowl, it's going to be the weirdest offseason and the weirdest 2023 season for Kyle Shanahan.
Yeah, I think that we're just looking at this from a glass half empty situation. Whereas to me, I think Kyle would look at it as a win-win, where he would frame it as, all right, now I got the choice, right? I got, a successful quarterback in Jimmy Garoppolo, who I know I can do some things with, and I got a bright future in Trey Lance. And to me, I don't think that one necessarily to Kyle Shanahan signals this was, wrong, this was bad. Like, to me, to answer the question that's on the prompt for those of you listening on the audio version only, you can also check us out on YouTube. Every single episode is going to be posted. Did they make the wrong move at the time? No, because like you mentioned, in the 2019 Super Bowl, Jimmy Garoppolo and his limitations couldn't get you past a team with a dynamic quarterback. That was the sole piece of your team that you were missing potentially to win a Super Bowl. A lot of people still feel that way, and understandably so. But I also think Kyle Shanahan is in a constant place of reevaluation. And if you decide that, hey, you know what I did wasn't ideal. Trey isn't moving along as quickly as we thought he would. And to be honest, if you spend 3 first-round picks or 2, however you cut the math, 2 first-round picks for a quarterback, and he's not, giving you signs that this was the right choice by, I would say, the second year, there's already going to be some red flags up. I think he's maybe, if we're talking about self-interest, the question then becomes, okay, well then how can I survive this? And to him, the way to do that is to win. Whether it's with Trey Lance or without Trey Lance, you need to reassure the fan base that your better judgment is going to lead to the ultimate goal, which is winning football games every single Sunday. So I think he's figured out, okay, this year, Trey Lance is out. I'm not going to have that, decision to make between whether I stick with Trey, go to Jimmy, whether, Jimmy even sees the field, all this good stuff. Jimmy's the quarterback. Jimmy now has a chance to win, and Kyle Shanahan to prove that he can, with a backup quarterback, whether it's Jimmy Garoppolo or not, win you football games. Then next year, the whole circus starts over again of, okay, well, he might be gone. He might not be, depending on how the season shapes out. Trey Lance is still the guy for the future. But still, if there are signs that Trey Lance, who's not going to have, a super long offseason, it's going to be abbreviated because of the injury. If Trey Lance shows signs that he still hasn't progressed to the point where Kyle Shanahan wants him to be, I do think there's a scenario where he survives that. And so that's why I do think, as much as making the move to trade up for a quarterback, to trade for the type of quarterback that Trey Lance is purported to be, was the right move in 2021, I can also see Kyle Shanahan being the type of guy who's already in a weird way sort of reworked the wheel with the quarterback scenario this season, something that we have not seen before in NFL history, to also then be the guy that says, you know what? I might have been wrong. This may not have been the right pick, but I can still prove to you that I can win football games and be the head coach for the Niners for a very long time.
I will say, I think that I think we kind of danced around this. I think what will happen this offseason, almost regardless of what the 49ers do and how much success Jimmy Garoppolo has, is he will sign elsewhere, and the decision will be out of Kyle Shanahan's hands. I'm relatively confident that Trey Lance will be the team starter next year, and Jimmy Garoppolo will not be the backup, or it won't be Garoppolo v. Lance, whatever the situation is. I'm relatively confident of that. And to the question that you're answering there, that was it wrong for Kyle Shanahan, considering what we know now about Jimmy Garoppolo? He's looked really good the last 2 weeks. Should the Niners not have traded up for Trey Lance in the 2021 NFL draft? I will unequivocally say they absolutely should have. Kyle Shanahan made the right decision. You have to look at, a larger sample size. Jimmy Garoppolo played well the last 2 weeks. Week 3 against the Broncos was terrible. There will be bad Jimmy. He will show his face again. Unfortunately, it's just the quarterback that he is. He will probably make a bad mistake, a bad throw. He'll stay too long in the pocket, won't get the ball out, take a bad sack to force him out of field goal range in the fourth quarter of a playoff game. Something like that will happen this season. It is what has happened to Jimmy Garoppolo the last number of seasons when he's been healthy for the 49ers. He's just good enough to get you, a playoff win or two in a year, and then after
just
that,
good enough.
I mean, it's a good problem to have, obviously, but I mean, he's also playing with the best defense in the NFL. He has really good weapons. He has a head coach who can turn Jeff Wilson Jr. into a 100-yard rusher every week. I mean, this is a dream scenario for quarterbacks. And Jimmy Garoppolo, unfortunately, just is not good enough to win a Super Bowl, even with a dream situation. So yes, trading up in the 2021 NFL draft was unequivocally the right decision for Kyle Shanahan. And frankly, Trey Lance's performance, whether or not he's a good quarterback or not, does not change that answer. It was and always will be the right decision to trade up for a quarterback in the 2021 NFL draft. You can make the case they drafted the wrong guy. You should have drafted someone else, Justin Fields or Mac Jones or whoever you want. Anyone else other than Trey Lance, you can make that case. But moving up and getting a new quarterback was not wrong. It will never be wrong. And this 49ers team, considering all the money they have locked up elsewhere, you mentioned Nick Bosa, who's going to get paid this offseason coming up. Deebo Samuel just got paid. George Kittle got paid. Trent Williams is the best player in the NFL. He is making a ton of money. There is no way that you can convince me that the Niners' decision to trade up and select a quarterback in the 2021 NFL draft was wrong. Partly because of the way the roster is set up and partly because Jimmy Garoppolo, unfortunately, is not good enough to win you a Super Bowl.
Sure, fine. But then the question becomes, would Trey Lance have been available if you didn't trade up? Because I think that's the next question a lot of people will be asking, depending on how Trey Lance, or what he becomes or what he doesn't become.
There's no way Trey Lance would have been available. Maybe Mac Jones, but not Trey Lance.
So Kyle Shanahan traded 2 first-round picks, 3 first-round picks for the right to select the 3rd best quarterback in a draft.
Yes.
And that is the right call.
It was the right call to. So you can argue with Kyle Shanahan maybe about his ability to identify what quarterback he wanted, identify what quarterback is good. But when it comes to trying to select a franchise quarterback, a player that changes the course of your organization for years to come, you do not want to leave it up to chance and leave it up to the decisions of other franchises. You want the decisions. You want the decision yourself. Now, maybe they made the wrong decision, but the process of trading up with the Miami Dolphins to take the 3rd pick in the draft and take a quarterback, you knew it was not Trevor Lawrence. You knew it was not Zach Wilson. You had your pick of the other 3 first-round quarterbacks, top 10 potential quarterbacks, top 15 pick overall quarterbacks. You had your choice. And trading away those, 3 first-round picks to have your pick of the litter from those 3 guys, absolutely, it is worth the risk.
I don't know if I can go that far yet, just because I think it does matter what the player becomes. Like, I do think it does. And that's why I also think that Shanahan is trying to set things up for himself, as we talked about at the beginning of this podcast, in self-preservation for if that pick does not work out. Because if you spend that much capital to go get that person and you are wrong, people will call for heads to roll. That's the way that the business works in sports, and particularly in football.
Which is what I was saying. So why would Kyle Shanahan be willing to admit that to everyone earlier than he had to by not, again, starting Trey Lance next year?
Because I think that if there's I don't think Jimmy's going to be back next year, just because, 1, I don't think they'll be able to afford him. 2, the circus that we saw this year. I don't know. Kyle Shanahan doesn't really care about the media, but to me, there's just too many different distractions for the locker room itself to overcome, especially if Jimmy does what we expect him to do, which is take this team to the playoffs. But I do think that if for some reason he's back next year, like, you just continue to kick the can down the road. Like, I know you talked about how it was in a previous episode, but Trey Lance coming up in his 3rd year, like there's a shorter window for him to prove what he is. Well, if he's never really given the chance to show what he is or isn't put in as much of a position to succeed, like, I just feel like Shanahan he's always got a trap door somewhere. And he is as much trying to figure out how he can win as much as how I could survive potentially my quarterback not working out for me. And I mean, I think it's kind of unfair to say that Trey Lance has been a bust at this point, because we just haven't seen enough of him. But Kyle Shanahan, in the way that he used Trey in his first couple of games, showed me that he didn't have full confidence in him, and certainly not as much confidence as he does in Jimmy Garoppolo, which, for all of his limitations and deficiencies, as you've laid out throughout this podcast, that also says a lot to me. Like, you trust the guy that, that you said couldn't win the Super Bowl more than your guy who's supposed to be able to win you a Super Bowl in the future.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think where Kyle Shanahan, because I think that past episode that you're referencing was when I talked about, kind of a similar line as this episode, Kyle Shanahan kind of, going into self-preservation mode. If he, if it becomes known that Trey Lance is not good and not a starting, caliber quarterback in the NFL, Kyle Shanahan will get blowback for that because he's the guy who invested all of these picks in Trey Lance. So if I'm Kyle Shanahan, why was I so gung-ho on starting this guy, Trey Lance, who Shanahan basically admitted to everyone via his play calling for Trey Lance's first 2 starts this year, clearly wasn't ready to start and ready to fully grasp this offense. Why would I do that if I'm Kyle Shanahan? That does not make a ton of sense to me. And I think he would be kind of doubling down on that mistake if he still felt like Trey Lance wasn't ready in future years. So I don't know. It's kind of a conundrum and a predicament for the 49ers. It's probably one that most teams and coaches would want to have because they're a team that, despite all of this, has been relatively successful the last number of years. And it looks like they're on pace to do that again this year. Who knows what the future holds beyond this season? It's a really, really unique problem, but it is certainly a problem and a predicament. And I'm sure one that keeps Kyle Shanahan, up at night sometimes because it's not like there's anyone he can go for advice because this situation just has simply not happened before.
Yeah, it's not like he has a dad that was a former NFL head coach or anything.
Well, he can ask him in general, but not specific advice for this kind of situation.
No, I know what you're saying.